Nigeria's gross domestic product for the fourth quarter of 2025 coming in at 4.07%. With respect to non-oil sector contributing, also oil as well, that's higher than the 3.98%. Actually, that's 3.98% in the third quarter of 2025 and higher than the 3.76% that we got in the fourth quarter of 2024. And interestingly enough, Norrenberger actually forecasts 4.1% growth in their latest report, talking about the reform dividend in 2026. We're happy to have Samuel Oyekanmi, who is the lead for research and insights at Norrenberger, and he joins us now from our Abuja studio. Samuel, great to have you. Happy New Year. Thanks for being with us. So you guys practically nailed it with your 4.1% forecast for that quarter. What are the drivers that you're looking at?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rotus. We looked at a couple of things, right? We looked at capital importation was already improving during that period. We also saw inflation moderating significantly as of then, somewhere around 15.15%. And then again, when you look at the normal conventional boom that you'd expect from the end of the year during December, where a number of productive activities improved, and then quite a number of things around different sectors, financial services industry, through the recapitalization, telecommunications industry also, as a result of the increase in tariff earlier in the year, we saw some significant improvement in terms of their performance from a financial point of view. Recently, we saw MTN's finances, PAT, somewhere around 1 trillion naira. So, of course, we had estimated all these, and then we were able to come up with that estimate of a 4.1 growth for Q4 2025. And I think that's quite interesting, considering where we are coming from. Of course, that's still far from the goal of the government, but then a significant improvement from the 3 to 3.2 regions that we've had in recent years.
All right. Now, I'm just looking at the fourth quarter GDP. Oil sector growing by 6.79% in that particular quarter, higher than the prior 2024 quarter, higher than Q3 2025. What do you make of that output there for oil?
Yes, that's quite significant, and if you look at the chunk of that industry, right, you see crude production, of course, with the full operation of Dangote refinery earlier in the year, we saw that also triggered an abnormal growth in Q2 2025. I think that growth was somewhere around 20% in real terms, but then in Q3 and Q4, we saw normalization. But when you compare that to recent years, even in recent history where we have always suffered from contraction, I think a 6% growth rate is quite significant, right, compared to where we are coming from. Now, the question is how sustainable will that be going forward? And I think that's a question that we should be able to answer in the short to medium term.
Now, non-oil doing about 3.8%. What have you made of the growth of the non-oil sector for Nigeria?
In recent years, the non-oil sector has continued to be a major driver of the Nigerian economy, right? Up until recently, when we start seeing oil sector also moving towards that trajectory. And then when you look at the composition of the non-oil sector, we see that services continues to take a huge part of that. And then it's no brainer, right? You have the likes of ICT in there, telecommunications, like I mentioned, transportation and storage also taking a huge chunk in there. A number of activities with railway also being major mainstream transportation now across some regions in the country. Financial services sector, of course, even away from the capitalization, the financial services sector, especially insurance, has seen significant growth in recent time. Of course, its contribution is quite small compared to the broad economy, but we've seen growth in double digits in that area, and that has really much driven significant growth from the non-oil sector. Yeah, we need to see a lot more, but we've seen progress compared to the 3.2.4 to the latter part of 4% that we've seen in recent history. So yes, quite significant development there.
Also want to get your thoughts on mining and quarrying doing 8.9% in that quarter. What do you make of that output?
Yeah, I think that's also a significant one. I think that also piggybacks from the crude oil and petroleum extraction industry. I mentioned earlier that with the Dangote refinery and a host of things around oil production. In recent time, we've seen production somewhere around 1.4, close to 1.5 million barrels per day. Of course, still lower than our OPEC quota, but that has also driven some level of activities from the crude oil part. And we've also heard conversations around other mining and extraction activities in the country, which, in my view, I don't think we've seen a lot more positives in that area, because one of the questions that I would put out is, as much as we are seeing a lot of questions and activities in the mining industry, is it translating to export earnings? Yes, we can track that of petroleum exports, but what about other things that are being extracted, things around lithium? I think if we are able to start tracking some of these other minerals, we might even witness more growth compared to what we currently see now as recorded by the MBS.
I have to get your thoughts on agriculture. It's a mainstay. 4% growth, Samuel. Maybe we can be doing better, but this compared to where we were before. What do you make of the 4% print for agriculture in Q4?
Yeah, very right, Rotius. Before now, Agric had pedaling around 1.2% real growth, but at 4%, I think that's quite great. For 2025, you would also agree with me that we saw food inflation moderate significantly, even at single digit as of January, and that's as a result of the huge supply that we now have when it comes to food. And I think that had played a significant role in also driving agri growth. If you look at crop production, things around better harvest season compared to what we used to have in recent time, that has continued to improve agricultural performance. And of course, if you look at 3, 4, 5 years ago, we suffered hugely from insecurity, especially in food producing region. But I would say in 2025, things calmed a little bit. Of course, there are still pockets of issues here and there, but I think compared to recent times in 3, 4, 5 years ago, there have been some improvements, and that has also trickled into improving supply, which has also driven prices of agricultural produce down. So I think quite positive in there, but question again is, how can we sustain that away from just improving supply? Because there are still many other things around post-harvest losses and a host of other issues around the agricultural value chain that we also need to start tackling. But at the surface, we need to maybe celebrate our wins. 4% is actually a positive one.
Okay, now not so positive, Samuel, is manufacturing, because you were mentioning how agriculture used to be in the 1% doldrums. That's where manufacturing is now. Is it an obvious thing with the electricity issues and it being import dependent? What do you make of manufacturing struggles right now?
I think I would just I would follow that your statement there. It is quite obvious. 2025. NPR averaged somewhere around 27% for most part of the year, which means that cost of borrowing is high for most businesses, and that is a main issue. For many of the businesses in the manufacturing sector, they need capital to be able to maybe drive working capital, even expand their businesses. But they're not able to do that because, of course, cost of borrowing is high. And then you also have high cost of operation. As a result of high energy, there was the review of the electricity tariff for Band A for most of them. Cost of diesel have also pretty much quadrupled. Cost of petrol also the same from a 2023 or 2022, for example. So those high cost of inputs and the eroding purchasing power of an average Nigerian, which means that we cannot buy as much as we used to buy, of course, has overreaching effects on manufacturing businesses, and that's pretty much what we had seen play out in the numbers.
All right, thanks for that. Let's get to your report now. When you talk about the reform dividend, what essentially is the report saying? Is it saying that reforms from 2023 will essentially manifest this year? Talk to us about what the report is saying.
Okay, so from 2023, you amongst every other person also know that the new administration came up with a lot of reforms which involved FX devaluation, removal of fuel subsidy, things around electricity, and a host of many other things, which pretty much caused significant pains for average Nigerians. So we had high cost, inflation was somewhere around 34% at that point. FX moved from about 400 to 1,006, 1,007, at some point 1,009. So of course, high cost of pretty much everything. Now, what we have seen between 2023 and 2025 was a phase of adjustment where businesses, Nigerians as a whole, have now found a way to adjust to those high costs. For example, a case in point would be MTN, who recorded significant losses as a result of FX devaluation. But early in 2025, they were able to reconcile some of their balance sheet, FX-denominated items on their balance sheet, which, as a result of that, we saw significant profits for them for the year. And a whole lot of people also did that. Now, having done that, we have also seen that the effect of those inflationary policies have begun to trickle down. In 2026 now, the question is, how do we now translate some of these macro gains? Because inflation has dropped, GDP has grown stronger, capital importation is stronger, FPIs are in, FX stability, our external reserve is somewhere around 50 billion USD. So of course, those things are good. But then how do an average Nigerian start earning the dividends of those macro gains? How do my eventual net income in my pocket, how does it get better compared to where it used to be? And those are the things that we think we should be expecting in 2026, especially because it's a penultimate year to an election, and the incumbent is also trying to vie to return to the position. So there are a lot of things, the stakes are really high also for such an administration, who would always want to ensure that some of those macro gains start translating into benefits to an average Nigerian and to businesses going forward in 2026.
All right, I want to get to some of your forecasts for 2026. You have inflation averaging 14.3. You say you see it year end at about 10. Talk to us about some of those triggers. Maybe repeats of what we saw in 25 with respect to you seeing inflation where it is for 2026.
So first, we think base effect, it remains a huge part of that projection, because don't forget that there was a rebasing exercise which pretty much brought the food component down to about 44%, and a host of many other items there also having some form of recalibration in that sense. So base effect will continue to impact inflation towards the downside. But away from that also, if we improve and continue with these our policies around food, which means that a huge part of that component, 44%, like I mentioned, will continue to moderate down. Now, the other part which continues to be like an anchor driving inflation upward is energy, transportation. Now, what we've seen in recent time is that with the full operation of Dangote refinery, there seems to be some level of flexibility around energy prices at the end of the day. Now, if that should slow down, except for the recent development between US, Israel, and Iran, which has now seen crude oil prices balloon somewhere around $79 per barrel, we estimated that prices of energy will drop, which would also impact transportation. And the combination of those will now start seeing inflation headline now drop to towards the end of the year, towards around 10%. But again, for the most part of the year, we expect it to hover around 14 to 15%, which brought about the average for the year around 14.3%.
Cool. Now, does that now feed into your forecast of 24% for the monetary policy rates? I mean, so that means you're expecting more cuts this year then?
Yes, we do. We had even initially anticipated the rate cuts should start early in the year. But what we also understand is that the CBN is trying to keep foreign portfolio investors in the country, and that is fair. But as the year goes on, inflation is dropping both in the US, the UK, in Europe, and in Asia. It means that central banks across the world will start cutting rates aggressively. When they do that, Nigeria's 26.5% MPR provides a huge premium for investors to bring in their funds. So pretty much at the end of the day, there's still incentive to remain here, even if the CBN decides to cut interest rate by 200 to 300 basis points. So of course, as inflation continues to taper towards that 10% in the end of the year, we definitely expect the CBN to come up with some more aggressive interest rate cut towards the end of the year.
All right, so I mean, we did, coming to GDP growth now, you're seeing 4 to 5%. We've done, at least for the full year, 3.87 or so. So I guess I want to get to downside risk, but talk to us about your forecast for GDP, because you're in line. I mean, IMF, I think, is 4.1. World Bank is looking at 4.4. So talk to us about the GDP outlook for 2026 from you guys.
Yeah, we are bullish around GDP growth for the year, and that's why we have put it around the modest point of 4 to 5%. But of course, it comes with its own downside risk, and one of the issues also is as a result of the current Israel and US war, that also plays a huge part in the crude oil market, which also has impact on our fiscal numbers and at the end of the day on the economy. We also have things around insecurity, which continues to be a bane, right, in the issues in the affairs of Nigeria, right? That also plays a huge part. I also mentioned earlier that 2026 is the penultimate year to an election. Oftentimes, one of the analysis that we did in that report was if Naira would be able to survive that G3 that comes before the election. Our take at the end of the day was that Naira would survive, but we know that there are going to be some pockets of hoarding and increased demand for the USD. But again, the US have pretty much intentionally on its own tried to weaken the USD, which means that there's no incentive to hold USD. So at the end of the day, as much as we have those downside risks, it still tends towards a more bullish outlook for the Nigerian economy for 2026, and we think that's going to pretty much play out. The IMF and World Bank have like a consensus around 4.4%. We think it's also going to average around that period, 4 to 5% at the end of the day.
Samuel Oyekanmi, lead research and insights at Norrenberger. Thank you so much for sharing this really great report. I encourage everyone to read it, and thank you so much for joining us to give us your outlook for the dividend, reform dividend for Nigeria in 2026. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.